Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved and soft-spoken stars, Keanu Reeves, finally reaches his breaking point? On a live taping of The View, what was supposed to be a lighthearted interview about his latest film spiraled into one of the most shocking confrontations daytime TV has ever seen. Joy Behar, known for her sharp tongue and refusal to back down, pushed Keanu harder than anyone expected. She dismissed his views, interrupted his answers, and mocked his calm demeanor. At first, Keanu responded the way fans know him best, quietly, respectfully, trying to diffuse the tension. But when Joy crossed a personal line, dragging his past tragedies into the conversation, Keanu's composure cracked. The audience gasped as the star who rarely raises his voice suddenly fired back, his words cutting through the studio air with the weight of years of silence. Even the other hosts froze, unsure whether to step in or let the moment play out. What unfolded next left fans stunned, producers scrambling, and the internet ablaze. This wasn't just another celebrity spat. This was Keanu Reeves finally saying what so many had been waiting to hear.
The atmosphere in the View studio that morning felt lighter than usual. The audience cheered as Whoopi Goldberg announced their special guest, Keanu Reeves. Known for his humility, quiet charm, and iconic career, Keanu walked on to the stage in his usual understated style, dark blazer, boots, and a modest smile. He waved to the crowd as they leapt to their feet, the applause lingering long enough that even Joy Behar rolled her eyes jokingly and said, all right, save some love for us." Keanu settled into his chair between Sunny Hostin and Joy, giving a polite nod to each host. The segment was supposed to highlight his upcoming film and his charitable work, especially his push for mental health initiatives. At first, everything unfolded smoothly. Whoopi, always the peacemaker, asked about his reputation as the internet's favorite person. Keanu chuckled shyly and deflected. "I don't know about that, but I'm grateful if people find kindness important." The audience swooned at his answer. That was the Keanu everyone knew, gentle, soft-spoken, humble. But then Joy Behar leaned forward with a smirk. "Keanu, you're too modest, but let's be real. You've made millions of dollars in movies. You got more motorcycles than some dealerships. Do you think it's a little out of touch to come on here and talk about regular people's struggles?" The tone shifted. The air seemed to tighten. The other hosts exchanged glances, but Joy wasn't done. "I mean, you talk about kindness, but you're part of the Hollywood elite. Isn't it easy to say, be kind when you're worth hundreds of millions of dollars?" she pressed. Keanu's smile faltered just slightly, but his voice stayed calm. "I don't really think about it that way. I try to live simply. I ride the subway, I walk places. I don't live extravagantly. For me, kindness isn't about money. It's about how we treat each other." The audience clapped, relieved that he handled it gracefully. But Joy wasn't letting go. "That sounds nice," she said, her words laced with sarcasm. "But don't you think you're playing into this saint persona the internet's built for you? I mean, are you really that nice, or are we all just buying into some myth?" The room grew quieter. Even Ana Navarro raised her eyebrows at the bluntness. Keanu took a beat before answering. His voice was steady, though softer than before. "I don't think I'm a saint. I'm just a person. I've been through things like everyone else, and I try to choose kindness when I can. That's all." The audience erupted again, but Joy leaned back in her chair unconvinced. "That's convenient," she muttered, just loud enough to be caught by the microphones. The spark had been lit. Sunny tried to redirect, asking Keanu about his foundation for children's hospitals, and for a few minutes the conversation returned to safer ground. Keanu spoke passionately about medical care, and how children shouldn't suffer because of money. The crowd hung on his every word, nodding and applauding. But Joy wasn't finished. She cut in abruptly. You know, Keanu, you talk about helping kids and mental health, but what about people in nursing homes? What about the elderly struggling to survive? Don't you think it's hypocritical to focus on one group when you're ignoring another? The room went still. Whoopi gave her a sharp side-eye, but Joy pushed on. You've never had to choose between paying rent or paying for medicine. Isn't it a little rich to sit there and tell working-class people to just be kind? Keanu leaned forward, his hands clasped. His eyes were steady, not defensive, but there was a weight behind them now. I don't think compassion has to be a competition. Children, seniors, anyone struggling, they all matter. If we start deciding who deserves kindness more, then we've already lost something. The audience broke into loud applause, some even standing. Keanu gave a small, almost embarrassed nod, but his gaze lingered on Joy, who only raised her eyebrow as if to say, "We'll see." What began as a friendly segment about movies and goodwill had turned into something else. The tension between Joy and Keanu was undeniable. Each exchange was sharper than the last, and the audience sensed it. This wasn't going to stay polite for long. The spark had been struck, and everyone in the room, from the viewers at home to the people sitting in the studio, knew they were about to witness a fire.
The studio audience could feel it. The polite smiles were gone, replaced by a sharper energy. Joy Behar wasn't backing down, and Keanu Reeves, usually reserved and careful with his words, wasn't shrinking from the challenge either. Whoopi tried to steady the ship. All right, let's not make this a boxing match. We're talking about kindness and support for vulnerable people. She looked at Joy, then Keanu. Surely we can agree that everyone deserves dignity, no? Joy crossed her arms, leaning forward as if she'd been waiting for this moment. Dignity, sure, but we're not living in a fairy tale, Whoopi. We're living in a world where kindness doesn't pay the bills, where seniors are choosing between cat food and medicine, where working people don't need celebrities telling them to be kind. They need policy. They need change. Keanu's brow furrowed slightly. He didn't lash out, but his voice carried more firmness than before. And change doesn't happen without people caring about each other first. If we can't treat each other with basic respect, how do we build a society that values fairness? Policy comes from people, and people need compassion. The audience applauded loudly. Joy smirked and shook her head. That's sweet, Keanu, but kindness doesn't change the fact that rent is skyrocketing in this city. Kindness doesn't stop corporations from squeezing people dry. It sounds good in a movie speech, but it doesn't solve the real problems. Ana Navarro jumped in, trying to mediate. Joy, I don't think he's saying kindness replaces policy. He's saying it's the foundation. And frankly, I've seen plenty of people in politics who could use more compassion. Sonny Hostin nodded in agreement. Exactly. Keanu's point is that we can't separate how we treat each other from how we shape laws. The two are connected. But Joy wasn't ready to concede. She leaned in toward Keanu, pointing a finger his way. Easy for you to say, with your millions in the bank. You'll never have to worry about a hospital bill wiping out your savings. You'll never know what it's like for regular Americans. So forgive me if I don't buy this "let's all just be kind" routine. It feels like privilege wrapped in pretty words. The audience gasped. Some booed, others clapped. The tension was electric. Keanu let the silence hang for a moment before speaking, his voice calm but edged with steel. I've lost people I loved. I've been alone. I've struggled with grief in ways money couldn't fix. Pain doesn't care about bank accounts. What I'm saying isn't from privilege. It's from living, from hurting, from knowing how much a little kindness can matter when everything else feels unbearable. The studio went quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy. Joy blinked, taken aback for the first time, but quickly composed herself. That's tragic, Keanu, and I respect your honesty. But grief isn't the same as poverty.
And we're talking about millions of Americans living paycheck to paycheck. They don't need speeches about kindness. They need rent control, tax breaks, and government accountability. Whoopi raised her hand. Joy, I think you're narrowing this too much. Keanu's not pretending to be a politician. He's speaking as a human being. But Joy leaned back with a scoff. Well, maybe we should stop inviting actors on to talk politics then. Leave it to the people who actually understand policy. The jab landed hard. The crowd murmured in disapproval, some even booing Joy outright. Keanu's jaw tightened, but he didn't snap. Instead, he looked directly at Joy, his voice steady. Maybe, but sometimes the people in power don't listen until someone outside their circle speaks up. If using whatever platform I have means I can remind people that compassion matters, then I'll take that risk, even if it makes me a target. The audience burst into applause, several rising to their feet. Whoopi tried to regain control, but it was clear now. The clash was no longer simmering. It was boiling. Joy glanced at the crowd, then back at Keanu, her expression hardening. So you think you're the voice of the people now? You think kindness is going to save seniors from losing their homes? You think compassion is enough to fix a broken system? Keanu leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. I think compassion is the only place to start. Without it, all we're doing is fighting over scraps, forgetting that human beings are suffering. And I refuse to believe we can't do better. The audience roared in approval, and even Sunny and Anna clapped at the conviction in his voice. Joy, however, wasn't swayed. She threw her hands up. You live in a fantasy world, Keanu, and the problem is too many people buy into it. The spark that had started earlier had turned into open flames. Joy Behar wasn't letting go, and for once, Keanu Reeves wasn't backing down either. The polite exchange had become a clash of ideologies, values, and lived experience. And it was clear to everyone watching that this battle was just beginning.
The air in the studio had shifted. The smiles were gone, the half-jokes had dried up, and what remained was the sharp edge of two people unwilling to bend. The conversation wasn't just about retirement savings or public policy anymore. It was about world views, about what mattered most, compassion or practicality, humanity or hard numbers. Joy Behar leaned forward, her voice clipped and direct. Let me spell it out, Keanu. Seniors don't need kindness from strangers. They need protection from being exploited. They need rules and regulations that stop the system from chewing them up and spitting them out. You can't legislate kindness, but you can legislate rent caps, health care coverage, and tax-free retirement accounts. That's the real conversation here. Keanu, usually measured, didn't flinch. His voice was steady, but carried an undertone of emotion that hadn't surfaced until now. And what happens when the rules fail? What happens when the legislation doesn't pass, when politicians argue for years and nothing gets done? People are left alone, and in those moments, kindness is what keeps them alive. I've seen it. I've lived it. The audience was silent, waiting. Joy pounced on his words. Oh, here we go again with the personal anecdotes. Look, I don't doubt you've had hardships, Keanu, but personal pain isn't public policy. With all due respect, that's not how the world works. Keanu leaned closer, his dark eyes locked on hers. No, Joy, that's exactly how the world works. Policy may set the framework, but how we treat each other fills in the space between the rules. You can have every law in the book, but if people stop caring about each other, the system collapses anyway. The tension was thick. Even Whoopi shifted uncomfortably, while Sunny and Anna exchanged worried glances. This wasn't the usual heated panel banter. This was a collision of raw philosophy. Keanu didn't stop. When my partner passed, no law, no policy, no amount of money could fix that hole. But the kindness of strangers, the people who showed up without asking, who offered support, that's what helped me keep going.
That's not a fantasy, Joy. That's survival. The audience gasped softly, the vulnerability in his voice cutting through the hostility. For a brief moment, Joy's expression softened, but she quickly regained her footing, unwilling to yield. She pointed at him, almost jabbing the air. "I'm sorry for your loss, I truly am. But do you know what happens to millions of widows and widowers in this country? They lose their homes because they can't afford the mortgage alone. They skip meals because the bills keep piling up. Kindness doesn't pay the mortgage, Keanu. That's the difference. I'm fighting for them, not for some feel-good moment." The crowd stirred, some clapping for Joy's bluntness, others booing her harsh delivery. The divide in the room mirrored the divide on stage. Keanu's jaw tightened, his voice rising, though not in anger, but in sheer conviction. "You talk about widows losing homes. You talk about bills piling up. Do you think I don't see that world? Do you think I don't know the world is cruel? I do. That's why I'm saying compassion isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. Because without it, those people you're talking about are just statistics on a paper. Human beings reduced to numbers." The audience erupted in applause, the rawness in his tone striking a chord. Sonny leaned in, almost whispering into her mic, "This is getting heavy." But Keanu wasn't done. He turned fully toward Joy now, his voice shaking slightly with intensity. "I've been told my whole life to toughen up, to accept that the world isn't fair. But I refuse, because if we all just throw our hands up and say, 'That's reality,' then nothing changes. Compassion is the only weapon we have to fight cruelty, and if we lose that, then no law in the world will save us." The audience leapt to its feet in a standing ovation. Joy sat back in her chair, lips pressed tight, her face unreadable. When the applause finally died down, Joy struck again, though her tone was quieter, more cutting. "You sound like a preacher, Keanu, but the world isn't a sermon, it's a battlefield, and the people who win are the ones who know how to fight, not the ones who just hope everyone will be nice." Keanu didn't miss a beat. And maybe that's the problem. Maybe we've treated life like a battlefield for too long. Maybe that's why so many people are suffering, because we keep forgetting that the person across from us isn't an enemy, they're another human being. His voice cracked slightly on the last words. That tiny break of emotion, raw, unpolished, hit harder than any rehearsed speech ever could. The audience was stunned into silence again. Even Whoopi's sharp retort faltered for a split second before she shook her head and tried to dismiss it. "Idealism, that's all it is. And idealism doesn't feed seniors. End of story." But the crowd didn't seem to agree. Murmurs of disapproval rippled through the audience, some calling out, "Listen to him!" Ana Navarro leaned in, unable to stay quiet. "Joy, with all respect, I think Keanu's making a point that people need to hear. Policy matters, yes, but so does heart. You can't have one without the other." Whoopi finally raised her hand, her voice booming over the tension. All right, let's all take a breath." But even she couldn't hide the look on her face, a mixture of shock and admiration at Keanu's uncharacteristic intensity. The moment lingered. Both Joy and Keanu sat back, eyes locked, neither willing to concede. The audience felt it too, that they had witnessed something raw, something more than TV sparring. It wasn't just a debate anymore. It was personal, vulnerable, and searingly human. And though the show would move on, everyone knew this flashpoint would leave a mark.
The studio felt charged, like the air before a storm. The tension that had been simmering between Keanu Reeves and Joy Behar all morning had reached the kind of intensity that left the audience on the edge of their seats. Even Whoopi, normally quick to step in and cool things down, leaned back and let it ride, her brow furrowed as if she knew the dam was about to break. Joy crossed her arms, her tone laced with sarcasm. "Keanu, it's lovely that you want the world to be a soft, compassionate place, but at some point, you've got to wake up and realize compassion doesn't pay the bills, it doesn't build housing, it doesn't fill stomachs.
Policies do. Numbers do. That's reality. Keanu sat forward, his usually calm presence charged with something different now. His voice was steady, but there was a fire behind it. And reality, without compassion, is a machine. Cold, unfeeling, and brutal. You talk about numbers like they're the answer, but those numbers represent people, Joy. People with lives, with families, with pain. If you strip away compassion, all you're left with is bureaucracy and cruelty. A wave of applause rose from the audience, cutting through the tension like thunder. Joy's lips tightened, her eyes narrowing. She raised her hand, silencing the clapping with a sharp retort. You want to talk about cruelty? Let's talk about reality. Seniors are dying in poverty because no one made sure there were protections in place. I'm fighting for legislation that ensures they don't starve, and you're sitting here spouting poetry about kindness like it's going to save them. Keanu's jaw clenched. He took a breath, as though trying to keep his calm, but his voice rose with an urgency the audience hadn't heard from him before. Kindness has saved me more times than I can count, and I know for a fact it saved others too. Maybe not in the ways you can measure on a balance sheet, but in ways that keep people alive. Maybe that doesn't matter to you, but it matters to me. The crowd erupted again, some cheering his words, others booing Joy for dismissing them. Ana Navarro leaned in, half joking, trying to defuse the moment. Okay, this is starting to feel like a heavyweight match. But Keanu wasn't smiling. He turned sharply toward Joy, his voice trembling with contained anger. You keep dismissing compassion like it's some weakness, like it's naive. But what's naive is thinking laws alone will save us. Without humanity, those laws are just ink on paper. Do you not understand that? Joy's voice cut like a blade. No, what's naive is believing we can build a system on people's good intentions. People are selfish. People don't always care. That's why you need laws. That's why you need enforcement. Otherwise, seniors get left behind. And I'm not going to sit here and let you sell this fairy tale that if we all just be nice, everything will work out. The audience gasped at her tone. Keanu's composure cracked. He sat forward, eyes burning. Don't you dare call compassion a fairy tale. I've buried loved ones. I've seen friends die alone because they were treated like numbers, like burdens. And the only thing that gave them dignity in the end was the kindness of those around them. That's not a fairy tale. That's the truth. The studio was silent, except for the sound of his words hanging heavy in the air. Joy didn't back down. Her voice grew sharper, almost shouting. And how many people never got that kindness, Keanu? How many died without it? That's why we need government protections. That's why we need rules. Your personal tragedies don't change the fact that people need real solutions. The line landed like a slap. The audience booed loudly, some yelling too far. Even Whoopi winced, shaking her head slightly. Keanu leaned back in his chair, his face pale, eyes dark. For a moment, he looked as if he might explode. Instead, he laughed, a short, bitter laugh that chilled the room. He shook his head slowly. You know what, Joy? You're right about one thing. The world is cruel, and I think you've just proven why. You've turned suffering into a debate point. You've reduced human beings to policy talking points. That's not strength. That's cruelty dressed up as pragmatism. The crowd erupted, clapping, cheering, and some even standing. Joy tried to respond, but Keanu's voice cut across the noise. I came here because I believed in having honest conversations. I believed in talking about compassion and humanity in a way that mattered. But if this show is just going to be a place where suffering is turned into a sparring match, then I'm done. He pulled off his mic, the sound of the Velcro tearing startlingly loud in the tense silence. The audience gasped. Keanu, Whoopi tried to interject, her hand reaching toward him. But he shook his head. No, I've said what I needed to say. He stood, the cameras following him as he pushed back his chair. The audience broke into loud applause, some even chanting his name as he walked across the stage. Joy called after him, her voice rising. Walking away doesn't solve anything, Keanu. He stopped at the edge of the set, turning back just once. His face was calm again, his voice low, but cutting enough to silence the entire room. Maybe not. But neither does shouting down compassion. Good luck with your numbers. And with that, He walked off stage. The sound of the door closing echoed louder than anything that had come before. The audience rose to its feet in a standing ovation. The co-hosts were left stunned, Joy visibly rattled, Whoopi shaking her head in disbelief.
The cameras cut wide, capturing the chaos. Joy trying to regain control, the crowd buzzing, the co-hosts whispering among themselves. It was the kind of live television moment no one would forget. The set was still humming with tension long after Keanu Reeves left his chair, his quiet resolve ringing louder than the thunder of the studio audience. Joy Behar sat stiffly, her smile tight, her notes trembling slightly in her hands. The producers had cut to commercial, but the damage was done. The clash had already carved itself into television history, and the aftermath would prove that the conversation had only just begun. When the cameras returned, the tone was different. Whoopi Goldberg, who had been unusually quiet during the height of the argument, leaned forward and spoke in a calm but deliberate voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we just witnessed something important. This wasn't just a disagreement about politics or opinions. This was about humanity, compassion, and how we choose to treat one another." The audience applauded, not as wildly as they had during Keanu's words, but with a more grounded resonance. Keanu, though seated back in his chair, didn't gloat. He simply nodded, his hands folded, his presence calm but firm. Social media, however, was far less composed. Within minutes, clips of the heated exchange were circulating on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Hashtags like #Keanu versus Joy and The View Showdown trended worldwide. Fans flooded platforms with messages praising Keanu for his grace under fire and his refusal to let Joy's dismissive tone derail his message. "Keanu Reeves just gave the most powerful TV moment of the year," one viewer wrote. Another said, "Joy Behar tried to laugh it off, but Keanu cut through the noise with truth and respect." Not everyone sided with him, of course. Some defended Joy, claiming she was only doing her job, pushing back, challenging a guest. But even those voices were drowned out by the overwhelming sense that Keanu had struck a chord deeper than any scripted TV debate. Later that evening, news outlets picked it up. Headlines blared across websites. "Keanu Reeves brings The View to a standstill." "Joy Behar left speechless after on-air clash," and "Hollywood's gentleman turns fierce defender of compassion." Panel discussions popped up on cable news, dissecting every pause, every sharp word, every flicker of expression on their faces. For Keanu, though, the impact wasn't about fame or virality. In a rare statement to a reporter outside a charity event 2 days later, he said quietly, "I didn't come on that show to fight. I just think sometimes the world needs us to slow down, to listen, and to stop treating compassion like it's weakness. If even one person heard that, then it was worth it." His humility only added fuel to the fire of admiration. People compared his composure to his film roles, always the reluctant hero, always the man pulled into conflict, not because he sought it, but because the truth demanded it. Joy, meanwhile, doubled down on The View the following day. She tried to explain, saying, "Look, this is what we do. We debate, we push back. Keanu's a nice guy, but I wasn't going to let him have the floor without challenge." But her words felt defensive, and even her co-hosts seemed uneasy. Sonny Hostin chimed in with a pointed remark, "But Joy, sometimes you don't have to fight the person sitting across from you. Sometimes you just let them speak, because what they're saying matters." The tension on set that day was palpable, but it also underlined the legacy of the clash. It wasn't just another viral celebrity moment. It was a cultural checkpoint. Viewers saw, maybe for the first time in a long while, that strength doesn't always roar. It sometimes speaks softly, calmly, and refuses to be shaken even when provoked. In the weeks that followed, think pieces emerged.
Columnists praised Keanu for reminding audiences that kindness can hold its own against cynicism. Podcasts replayed the argument, analyzing the deeper themes of respect, empathy, and dignity in public discourse. And as for Keanu, he carried on as usual, promoting his film, supporting his charities, and avoiding the spotlight when possible. But that clash with Joy Behar followed him, not as scandal, but as a testament to the kind of person he is. For viewers, the legacy was clear. Sometimes the most powerful moments on television aren't scripted. They're born from raw human conviction, colliding with dismissive laughter, and proving that grace can hold its own against ridicule. And so, while Joy may have had her lines and her punchy retorts, it was Keanu's quiet strength that endured. A single clash had turned into a defining reminder that dignity, even in the face of confrontation, can change the conversation entirely.